Hi folks, HR Funk here. With two very similar handguns, which both, from their respective manufacturers, were devised to compete directly with a handgun that, over the course of the last couple of decades, has become one of the most popular, if not the most popular handgun for defensive purposes, and that is the Glock 19. And in my right hand, I have the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 Compact, and in my left hand, I have the Ruger RXM. Both of these in form and function are very similar to the Glock 19. They both have 4-inch barrels. They both have 15-shot 9mm magazine capacities. They are both polymer frame striker fire pistols, and as I said, they were both developed specifically to compete directly with the Glock 19. So I thought it might be kind of fun in this video to compare these two contenders to the Glock 19 throne against each other to see if either one of them has any significant advantages over the other, and for anyone who might be considering a purchase to see if either one is going to give a prospective purchaser more performance for their money. So in this video, we're going to take a close-up look at these two handguns. I'm going to compare them directly. We're also going to head out to the range and see how they perform in accuracy and function in actual defensive shooting drills. So let's get right into this and see how these two stack up against each other. Starting our comparison from the top down, we'll take a look at the sights, and both of these have raised sights. These used to be called suppressor height sights, but nowadays I think they're being used more commonly to get a co-witness with the optic, and I'll talk about the optic mounting systems for both of these in just a moment. But looking at the rear sight of the RXM, it is a blacked out serrated version to keep down on glare. For the M&P, we have two white dots. Both of these are fixed sights. Both of them are drift adjustable for windage. For the front sight, on the M&P, we see a third white dot, and for the Ruger, we see a combination night sight and also a white outlined sight for normal use, or I should say a white outlined dot for normal use, and for some reason that's coming out of focus there. Also on the RXM, we have a tritium insert in the front sight for use during adverse lighting conditions, and of the two sighting systems, I prefer the Ruger largely because of that front sight. There's nothing wrong with the three white dots used by the M&P, but I just prefer the additional low light capability of the RXM. Turning our attention to optics mounting, both of these handguns are capable of accommodating a wide variety of optics, but they go about it in two different ways. The Smith & Wesson requires the use of different mounting plates, and you can see one of them right here below my Loophole Delta Point Pro. And this, I think, makes it inferior to the Ruger system. Ruger is able to accomplish this with no mounting plates whatsoever, so the optics mount lower. Notice with this specific plate, now this is an aftermarket plate that I had to get specifically for this optic, but it adds some thickness. The Smith & Wesson factory plates are not this thick, but this is one of the thicker ones that's out there. In any case, you have to switch those around for whichever plate you need for a given optic in order to be able to mount that. Whereas with the RXM, it simply uses interchangeable posts that are underneath the optic here, and the optic screws directly down to the slide. I like this better. I think it's an easier way to go about accommodating a wide variety of optics, and you can go from the full-size RMS pattern down to the RMS-C versions. You can also accommodate the Loophole Delta Point Pro without the need of this type of an optic mounting plate. Now I think Smith & Wesson does have a thinner one for the Delta Point Pro by now. I've had this one for several years. But in any case, I do think the Ruger version for optic mounting is superior to the M&P. Both of these pistols have loaded chamber indicators that are executed in essentially the exact same way, which is just a port at the rear of the barrel hood, and at least in good lighting, theoretically, you can look down through that port and see if you see a cartridge rim, knowing whether or not then you have a round in the chamber. I don't particularly like this system. I have never liked this system. I think it's widely used by a lot of manufacturers because it's an inexpensive way to go about it, but I just don't care for it. I still think the best way to find out whether or not you have a round in the chamber is to perform a press check. Both of these handguns also have front and rear slide serrations for manipulating the slide however you might want to. The RXM uses these fairly wide grooves, and they work well enough. The M&P has the fish scale pattern serrations. Of the two, this just seems like as I grasp it, I have a better hold on the slide. I like these serrations. They look cool. This is something that Smith & Wesson has improved in the 2.0 versions of all the M&Ps, I think, at this point. Originally, there were only the serrations down here at the bottom of the slide. Now they have them extending up to the upper portion of the slide as well, and that's a much better way to go about that. So I think of these two, it's a slim advantage, but the advantage for slide serrations goes to the M&P. Ambidexterity. This is a category where the M&P has a definite advantage, sort of. Maybe a definite partial advantage is the way I should say it. The RXM really is not ambidextrous at all. It is set up for a right-handed shooter. The slide stop is on the left-hand side. The magazine release is on the left-hand side. There is really nothing on the right-hand side at all, and the magazine release itself is not reversible. I think that's a mistake. I mentioned that in my original review of this handgun. I think this should have been made reversible, but it's not. The M&P has a slide stop on both sides, but one of the historic issues with the M&P's ambidextrous slide stop. Now, in all fairness to Smith & Wesson, they do build this as a slide stop, not a slide release, but many people will look at the contour of this and the texturing and think that's a slide release as well. And I was able to do this a moment ago, and now I can't. So it is extremely difficult to release the slide with the right side slide stop, whereas on the left side, it's not difficult at all. So keep that in mind if you are left-handed, or if you're wanting to release the slide with the slide stop on the right-hand side. That can be very difficult with an M&P. The magazine release is reversible, so you can set this up if you want to on this side. So ambidexterity goes to the M&P, but there are a couple of caveats with that. Another big difference between these two handguns has to do with the internal design. The RXM, as many of you probably know, has a removable fire control unit, so this can be swapped out of this frame and go into a different one, whereas the M&P doesn't have anything of the sort. Now, interestingly, there is an internal chassis system here that's used to give this pistol more rigidity, and also it's allegedly supposed to help mitigate recoil. So there are advantages either way here. I think I'm going to call this a draw. This is going to come down much to individual purchaser preference. If you want to have the ability to swap out the fire control unit and potentially move that into a different frame, you're going to have advantage RXM. If that doesn't matter to you and you want to have a little bit more rigid frame and you want to have potentially a little bit more recoil mitigation, then the M&P is going to be the way to go. On we go to the frame, and I'll start with the M&P, and with both of these I'll start from the front and work my way toward the rear. And we can see, beginning with the M&P, there is a 3-groove equipment rail right there, and on the RXM there is only a single groove, and I have no idea why Magpul didn't add a couple more grooves in there. It seems like that would have been easy enough to do, but for whatever reason they did not. So advantage for the equipment rail goes to the M&P. On the Ruger's frame, we do have some texturing right here on either side, either for a thumbs forward grip or an index point for your trigger finger. And oddly, on the M&P, there is nothing like that. Now, there's a lot of other things. You've got the takedown latch right there that you can rest your thumb on for a thumbs forward grip. And over here, there's really nothing as far as an index point for your trigger finger. So for whatever that texturing might be worth, the advantage goes to the RXM. Coming back to the grip frame itself, one of the things I mentioned in my initial review of the RXM is that although Magpul corrected the angle of the RXM over and above what we get with the typical Glock. So we do get a better pointing handgun than we got with Glock. For whatever reason, they did not add any contour to this whatsoever. And when we look at the natural curvature of our hand right here, when I hold the RXM, and I said this in my initial review, it feels like I'm holding on to a block of wood, and it really does. Whereas the M&P has a very nicely shaped grip insert that we see right here, which changes not only the size and shape of the backstrap, but also it has swells to the side to fill in this hollow area in the palm of your hand, and it feels very, very good. I think in terms of grip angle and contour, the Smith & Wesson M&Ps are some of the best feeling handguns on the market. Looking at the texturing around the circumference of the grip, this is also superior on the M&P. With the RXM, this just doesn't feel that good, and I know Magpul took a lot of time talking about this being the enhanced handgun grip, and that texturing just doesn't feel that great to me. Whereas with the M&P, when I grasp this M&P 2.0, it almost feels like it's grabbing me back. This very much feels secure in my hand, and it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. So I have always liked this texturing on the M&P. I know some folks don't like it because it rubs up against them and feels scratchy or whatever. I've never had that issue with an M&P, and I like that grip texture. So I'm going to say advantage to the M&P. In general, when it comes to the design of the frame and particularly the design of the grip, the only real advantage I see with the RXM is the texturing I mentioned here at the front for your index point or your thumb forward hold. One other difference in the grip frames for these two handguns can be seen right here. The RXM does have a flared magazine well, whereas the M&P does not. Now there is a slight relief right here on either side so you can grasp a stuck magazine if you need to and pull it out by the base plate. With the RXM, the magazines extend slightly below the magazine well so you can still grab them if you need to and pull them out. So they both have that feature, but the RXM does have a flared magazine well, as you see right there. I want to revisit the controls of these two handguns for just a moment. I realize I already touched on the magazine release and the slide stop, but there are a couple of other things that I wanted to point out. Beginning with, on the RXM, we have a textured magazine release that is extended, or at least extended from this relieved portion of the frame. So to whatever degree that might be important, you do get that extended magazine release on the RXM. Where on the M&P, it's not really extended at all. It is textured somewhat. I've never had a problem releasing the magazine with the M&P magazine release, but it is somewhat enhanced on the RXM. When it comes to the slide stop, we get a little bit more contour with the M&P in order to be able to actuate that and lock the slide to the rear. Whereas on the RXM, it is not contoured nearly as much. I still don't have a problem locking it to the rear, but I think the advantage for the slide stop when you are doing that goes to the M&P. For the trigger, I have to add a caveat. Smith & Wesson has changed the trigger in the M&P 2.0 Compact Series, and this is an older pistol. This was loaned to me by Hop Armament. Thanks to all the folks there for letting me use this. And this allegedly was a used pistol, but when I brought it home and took it out of the box, I could not find any indication this pistol had ever been fired. But in any case, it was apparently traded there, and it is an older one, as I said, so it doesn't have the new flat face style trigger that Smith & Wesson is using. A lot of people think that is superior to the older hinged version. I've never had a problem with the older hinged version, but I just want to make everyone aware that that has changed. The RXM has more of a flat face trigger that is very similar to the Glock style trigger. And this is something that has improved with the RXM. When I first started to shoot this, and something that I talked about in my initial review of the RXM, was the fact that the trigger was kind of inconsistent. It was a little bit stagey. This pistol now probably has close to 1,000 rounds through it, and however much dry firing I've done, and the trigger has improved significantly. I would say at this juncture, it is better than the average Glock. Now I still get some creep, and I'll hold this and do it left-handed. You can see that it's still moving somewhat, but it's breaking just a lot more cleanly, and it's a lot more consistent than it was before. With the M&P, this is the M&P trigger that I've known for years and years and years. Of the two, the RXM trigger feels like it's breaking with less trigger pressure or trigger finger pressure. But I'll weigh these momentarily and see if I can get an actual reading on those. Because of the contour of the trigger on the M&P, it breaks closer to the rear of the trigger guard. So you see right there, it's more or less all the way back to the back, and there is a projection here at the back of the frame or the back of the trigger guard to act as an over travel stop. Whereas on the RXM, there is nothing like that, and we see a little bit more over travel there. So let me grab my trigger pull scale and we'll see where these two are breaking. Let's see what kind of information we can get with the trigger pull gauge, starting out with the M&P 2.0 compact. £5, 10.5 ounces for the first pull. 5 pounds, 13.2 for the second pull. And 5 pounds, 11.9 for the final pull. That gives us a 3-pull average of, apparently right at the last pull, 5 pounds, 11.9. So coming in between 5.5 and 6 pounds for the M&P 2.0. Now let's see where the RXM is breaking. First pull is 4 pounds, 5.9 ounces. Second pull, 4 pounds, 15.5 ounces. I might have overpulled that one just a little bit. 4 pounds, 12.9. And that brings the average to 4 pounds, 11.5 ounces. So we're breaking about a pound lighter on the RXM than with the M&P. Although, as I said, I'm not entirely sure this handgun had ever been fired before. So after 1,000 rounds, we might see that improve somewhat. Definitely, as I said, the trigger on the RXM has improved during the time that I have owned it and been shooting it. And once again, Smith & Wesson has changed the trigger system in the M&P. The current M&P 2.0 compacts have the newer flat face style trigger that many people think has a better break. So I think I'm going to call the trigger pull test here a draw, because I don't think it's necessarily fair, or maybe I should say it's not really an apples to apples comparison. But both of these obviously have manageable trigger pulls for defensive handguns. So if you want to say there's an advantage to the Ruger's trigger pull, by all means go ahead and do that. I think I'm calling this one a draw. On we go to the shooting comparison between our two contestants. When I first got to the range, I wanted to test the mechanical accuracy of both of these pistols to see if there was any advantage one way or the other. So I set up at a distance of 15 yards. I'm shooting rested from the bench, and the ammunition that I'm using is sponsored by Hot Munitions. I have 2 of their loads. The first up that you're going to see out of each handgun is a 124 grain full metal jacket load. The second is a 147 grain jacketed hollow point load. So let's head to the range and see how those loads performed out of these 2 handguns. Here are the results of that benched accuracy test with our two handguns. The targets on top are from the RXM. The targets on the bottom are from the M&P 2.0 Compact. First up, we can take a look at the 124 grain full metal jacket load from Hot Munitions. And with the RXM, the 5 shots went into a group size of 2.25 inches, so not bad. With the M&P, this group was slightly tighter. This is a 2-inch group from that distance of 15 yards, so both of those are looking very good with that load. Moving over to the 147 grain jacketed hollow point, I think this might be the best group I have ever shot with the RXM. This 5-shot group from 15 yards measures just under 1 inch. It came out to 7/8 of an inch, or 0.875 inches. With the M&P, this one comes out to 1 7/8 inches, or 1.875 inches. And really, it's only that size because of this one shot. These 4 are comparable to the 5-shot group that I have up here with the RXM. And really, that load is looking extremely accurate from Hot Munitions. So good job to the guys at Hop. You're putting out a great 147 grain load. Obviously, the accuracy that we're seeing here with all of these groups is adequate, actually beyond adequate for defensive purposes. If I average the group size with the 2 groups from the RXM, that comes out to just over 1.5 inches. It comes out to 1.6 inches, rounded to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. The 2 groups with the M&P come out to 1.9 inches, rounded to the nearest 1/10 of an inch. So again, absolutely, these are adequate for defensive purposes. The RXM, at least based solely on this group, looks like it might have a slight advantage in mechanical accuracy, although the M&P was a little tighter here. The averages for the RXM are tighter, largely because I had such a small group here. But again, I think the accuracy probably is really a wash. These are definitely adequate enough for their intended purpose. Now it's time to get into some defensive shooting with these 2 pistols. And first up is going to be controlled pairs from a distance of 5 yards. And while I'm conducting this drill, I'm also going to be performing a reloading exercise. I'll fire 2 rounds, the slide will lock open on an empty chamber, and then I'm going to reload the pistols. Reason being, I want to see if the extended magazine release and the slightly flared magazine well of the RXM have any real advantage over the standard release and non-flared magazine well of the M&P. Now, you'll notice when I perform my reload that the slide will be locked open, and I'm going to be grasping the slide and releasing it in this type of a manner, not trying to use the slide stop as a slide release. This is the way I was trained to reload an M&P pistol. That way I don't have to worry about whether or not the offside slide stop is going to release the slide, or even if the left side slide stop is going to release the slide. I'm going to negate all that, use a gross motor skill, and reload the pistols. So here's how the drill went. Next is going to be a failure drill from a distance of 7 yards. In this drill, I'm going to fire 2 shots to the body and 1 shot to the head in rapid succession. This simulates a failure where the first 2 shots did not stop a hostile aggressor, so the final 3rd headshot was necessary in order to mitigate that problem. Once again, I'll start out with the RXM, then I'll move to the M&P, and actually, I should probably put this in here now. When I fired these drills, I went all the way through every drill with the RXM, then I went all the way through every drill with the M&P. Reason being, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't switching back and forth and maybe causing one pistol or the other to perform more or less poorly because I had just shot one and I hadn't reacclimated myself to the other. So when I did switch from the RXM to the M&P, I did several dry fire sequences with the M&P before I started to shoot live fire in order to not have that problem. Anyway, let's go back and take a look at the failure drills. Now it's time to add a little bit of distance to our test. This time around, I'm going to be shooting from 15 yards. I'm going to fire 5 shots in a row, first with the RXM, then with the M&P. Let's see how that went. And finally, I'm back to 25 yards. Again, I'll be firing 5 rounds, first with the RXM, then with the M&P. Let's go back to the range. Here's a look at those 2 targets after all the drills were complete. The RXM is on your right, the M&P is on the left, and I've labeled all these and I've used different color stickers. If you're able to zoom in on these, you can see exactly which stickers go with which drill, and I've got the distance of that drill on here to help identify them. The group overall from all of those drills that I have with the M&P is better than the group that I have overall with the RXM. And I find this to be interesting, especially since the RXM has a better, or at least a lighter trigger, and the RXM mechanically was at least a little bit more accurate. I think a lot of this has to do, and I've given this some thought, I think a lot of this has to do with that grip frame on the M&P and how it fits my hand so much better, so it points more naturally. I come out of recoil much more on target than I do with the RXM. And I've talked about that mag pull grip, and it feels like a block of wood, and it's just not all that great. Now, clearly, these are the results with one shooter on one day under one set of conditions with these 2 targets. But I think I'm onto something there. I think because of that better fit with the M&P grip, I'm just able to place my shots better with it. My 2 headshots were much nicer with the M&P than I was able to obtain shooting those same drills with the RXM. Also, this is kind of interesting. If you noticed The first two controlled pairs, and I've got one sticker over those two shot holes here, and one sticker, you can just barely see it right there, over the other two shot holes, almost went through the exact same hole both times, the first two times I shot that drill. And I didn't notice until I was editing this video that I accidentally went back to the 7-yard line for the second two controlled pairs. So I actually was shooting these two from a greater distance, and I still had that second controlled pair that almost went through the same exact hole again. And the third time around, I had one here and one that was back down here. So it only took me 3 stickers to cover up 6 shot holes, or at least the result of 6 shots on the target from both 5 yards and 7 yards. And you can see I strung them a little bit more vertically here with the RXM. Again, the headshots were better on the failure drills. The 15-yard drill, which are the green stickers that you see on both of these, the group size from 15 yards is pretty comparable, but I was shooting more slowly, so I was not getting as much influence coming back out of recoil or coming up on target, because I was drawing for those first two drills that you saw. And that, I think, just bears out what I was saying before as far as the M&P pointing more naturally for me. From 25 yards, I'm starting to pull my shots a little to the left here, and they are looking a little bit more well-centered. Group size from 25 yards is about the same, but once again, I'm shooting at a much slower cadence from 25 yards than I was shooting from closer. So these are the results, and I'd be interested to hear anything any of you might want to say in the comments about what you might have seen during the drills or how you might be able to interpret these targets, but that's what I came up with in looking at them after it was over. I don't think either one of these, as I said before, is that much more mechanically accurate, maybe a little bit of an advantage to the RXM. But in terms of shootability, in my estimation, that goes to the M&P. With respect to the reloading drills, I didn't notice any significant advantage for the extended magazine release and the flared magazine well on the RXM. In fact, the only thing I really noticed when performing the reloads was that the M&P's slide was a little bit more difficult to hand cycle. It felt like the recoil spring was a little bit heavier, and it just didn't seem to release quite as easily, which once again goes back to something I said earlier in the video. I don't think that handgun has been shot very much at all, whereas the parts on the Ruger are more well worn in, and also the recoil spring probably has relaxed a little bit over the course of however many rounds I put through that. So it was a little easier to reload the RXM in that respect, but it didn't have anything to do with the extended magazine release or the flared mag well. The final considerations in our comparison are going to come down to product support and price. For product support, the Smith & Wesson M&P 2.0 Compact is backed by Smith & Wesson's lifetime service contract, so if you ever have a problem with this handgun, you can return it to Smith & Wesson and they'll take care of it. Similarly, Ruger has an excellent product support program of their own, so I think between those two, this is going to be a draw. For price, the M&P 2.0 Compact has been around for several years now, and Smith & Wesson offers several different variations, many of which have metal frames, some of which have other special bells and whistles. The MSRP, depending upon which exact version you're looking at, range from about $660 or so up to almost $900, and there might be a couple of special limited editions that are even more expensive than that. For the Ruger, I think there are only 2 versions currently offered. There is the standard version that you see here, and there is also the compliant version for restrictive states that has just a 10-shot magazine. Otherwise, this is the exact same pistol. There are no other variations, but the MSRP for this handgun is $499.99, so $500. So again, I'll leave it to you to tell me in the comment section whether or not you think the additional price is merited by the Smith & Wesson pistol, or if you think the Ruger pistol at the lower price is going to be good enough for anything you might be able to ask of a handgun in this category. And that's going to do it for my M&P 2.0 Compact versus RXM video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about this video, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by my website, hrfunk.com. Check out the news and information page to see all the latest things that are going on with me and the channel. And go by the products page because a lot of the things that I've reviewed here on the channel have links to the manufacturers on that page. And there's information beneath some of those links that'll save you some money if you decide to make a purchase. I want to say one last big thanks to Hot Munitions for loaning me the M&P 2.0 Compact and also for providing the ammunition that I used during this video. See you next time, folks, and until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.